So let's move on now to the stomach. The stomach is specialized for this mechanical and chemical digestion. So it's a muscular sac that churns and contracts and squashes and, like I say, churns this ingested bolus of food. It also carries out significant chemical digestion, the release of pepsinogen, which is an enzyme which is converted into pepsin, helps to break down along with other gastric juices. And it converts this bolus of food into a semi-liquid, which is known as chyme. If we look at the diagram, we can see here we've got the esophagus joining the stomach, and this region of the stomach we know as the cardiac region. So this region here is known as the cardiac region, and it opens up via the cardiac orifice. That's the junction between the esophagus and the stomach. We can then look at some other regions of the stomach superior to this junction. This region here, we have the fundus. So we have the fundus in this region here, we have the cardiac region here. The fundus is usually filled with gas that's being produced via this chemical digestion. And then we have this large space in here, which is the body of the stomach. And we can see on the internal structure of the stomach, it's thrown into these series of folds called rugae. And that helps to increase the ability of the stomach to distend, altering in size. We've got these elevations. We can also see in this region here, we have what's known as the pylorus. And this is a narrowing of the body of the stomach that leads it towards the duodenum. And importantly, in this region, we have what's known as the pyloric sphincter. A really important sphincter that regulates the passage of chyme through this space into the duodenum, and that's the pyloric sphincter. When the pressure within the stomach becomes so high, then food passes through, this chyme passes through this sphincter, enabling it to carry on through the gastrointestinal tract and for it to be digested. We can also recognize a few other landmarks or boundaries, external features of the stomach. We have this nice long curvature around here. That's called the greater curvature, and we'll appreciate a series of blood vessels that run along here later on. And we can also see that here we have the lesser curvature, and that's an important landmark as it has a peritoneal attachment with the liver. We can see we have other structures like the cardiac notch, this junction between the fundus and the esophagus. And we can see where the lesser curvature tapers down towards the pylorus. We have the angular incisure. So we can see that down here. On this side of the screen, we can actually see this muscular bag and all its smooth muscle fibers arranged either longitudinally or arranged kind of circular that surround the muscle. And these muscles contracting enable that mechanical digestion to occur. So we can see the various layers of muscles that are surrounding the stomach. If we look at the internal surface of the stomach, so here we can see a section through the stomach. We've got the outer surface of the stomach here, and we've got the internal surface here. We can see in this thickness of the stomach, we can see the various muscle layers. We can see the circular and the longitudinal muscle layers we can see here. And we can also see the mucosa, this most inner lining of the stomach. And that's really important, this inner surface, this mucosa. It's important because it contains what are known as gastric pits. Gastric pits that communicate with some gastric glands. And deep within these gastric glands, we can just make out some gastric glands down in here, down at the very bottom of these pits. We can see these individual pits that open up onto the surface of the stomach. There's two types of cells. This isn't a physiology course, so we're not going into too much detail here. But briefly, these two different types of cells, these parietal and these chief cells, are important in that chemical digestion. The parietal cells secrete hydrochloric acid. Secretes hydrochloric acid as protons, as hydrogen ions, and as chlorine ions into the lumen of the stomach. And this reduces the pH to around about 1 or 2. The importance of this is it kills microorganisms, it denatures proteins, and it helps to break down plant cell walls. It also, importantly, this acidic environment activates pepsin. Pepsin is released by this second group of cells called chief cells, and these secrete pepsinogen. Pepsinogen is inactive. Pepsinogen is inactive, and it requires the acidic pH created by the parietal cells to become active. So the acidic lumen converts pepsinogen to pepsin, and it is the pepsin that breaks down proteins. So without this acidic lumen created by the parietal cells, proteins in the ingested bolus wouldn't be able to be digested.